Now, I welcome Anton and Leonie, who will tell us a lot about how in TC we can benefit from user habits. Let's get started.
Thank you. So, hi everybody. Although this is the third time Anton and I prepared a presentation for this special occasion, this is actually the first time being back on stage, being reunited in person since 2019, so this is very exciting to me. My name is Leonie Saremba. I'm Head of User Assistance at Remira. And in the following, I'm going to introduce you into the basics of habits, their correlation with intuition, and specific concepts of user psychology. But before we start talking about habits, let's talk about human behavior. Generally, you can say human behavior is split into three parts. There's a physical one, a social one, and a mental one. Those three parts don't necessarily need to be well balanced, but they are the main characteristics of your human behavior. So let's take attending TC World Conference, for example. In my case, personally and physically, I show up. And actually, I'm giving this presentation, and I will be along later after this presentation. So it brings me to the next part, the social part. I want to contribute to the knowledge exchange within our professional community. And of course, I want to mingle, network, and meet dear old friends and colleagues. And mentally, it's a ride. I already told you I'm excited. It's a bit stressful and giving me anxiety. But later on, I will be happy that I made it through this presentation. But I guess we can agree that human behavior does not only show on special occasions like this one. So let me ask you, are you really aware of each and everything you are doing throughout your day? And did you know that habits make up nearly half of your daily actions? Interesting, right? So what exactly is a habit? And to keep it simple, let's just look it up. It's a behavior pattern acquired by frequent repetition or physiologic exposure that shows itself in regularity or increased facility of performance. Meaning, as soon as you start doing something and it becomes frequent and really a regular action, you establish patterns, you establish a habit. And the easier it gets, the more natural certain habits and actions become to us. So actually, you are running kind of a behavioral script without even noticing it. And speaking of those ingrained habits, I found an even simpler definition. Behaviors done with little to no conscious thought. And once we have reached this sort of a no-brainer in our actions, you might wonder, how is that any different from intuition? And to complete our high-level terminology work, let's look intuition up again. Immediate apprehension or cognition. And this is what we want to talk about. This twilight zone where we perceive our actions as ingrained, natural, and intuitive. And guiding you towards intuitive user systems, of course, we speak about user psychology. And we consider two main aspects in this presentation. The habits, things we learned, patterns we learned, and we act upon. And natural processes being triggered in your brain that we all experience just because we're human beings. And this brings me to the fun part, the examples. So we thought about main points to consider when talking about intuitive user systems. And let's start with navigation and orientation. So very naturally, we find orientation when looking at well-balanced layouts. And from our experience, we expect certain UI elements, specific page layouts, navigation elements, and also user flows. So let's have a look at this example. Nothing suspicious, so Excitement. Nothing suspicious so far. But we can easily recognize the search bar on top. We see the navigation pane. We see certain page contents easy. Let's change it a bit to double check. And instantly, this seems a bit odd, right? So nodding would be great. And basically, those who grew up learning a language with a reading direction from right to left may start feeling relief because they are used to it. The majority of us won't be. And this does not only affect text contents. So it's really about the alignment of navigational elements, this whole page layout, and the icons even flipped. And the only thing that changed is actually the habit of the person looking at it, the ingrained habit of the reading direction. Let's talk about categories. We tend to categorize almost everything, and we well adapt to categories, especially when information seems to be quite overwhelming. And of course, at the same time, we are influenced by general categories such as stereotypes, things of our daily actions, and classic data sets such as vehicles, interior, or groceries. Now, thinking about user assistance, how do categories come into play? And we'll have a look at 3 examples. Here we see a lot of text content leading you to further information. But on the left side, we see certain topics or themes as some sort of navigation element on the page. And in the main page section, we see categories for the developer community that lead to further information, such as how can I get started? What about collaborating? Another example, on hovering the docs navigation item, we see that the Spotify docs are actually categorized. And in those categories, we see even more links to really established information products such as quick start guides, developer guides, or onboarding information. And one more thing, categories do also show when filtering for information. Next aspect we want to discuss is the focus. So, according to perception psychology, we naturally act on different triggers that visually guide our focus, such as size, colors, anomalies. And if you're interested in this topic, look up our first presentation on YouTube. It's about simplified graphics and screenshots, and basically what we all experience because we're human. Now back to the habit part. Once we naturally processed all this information, we are ready to intentionally scan the page content for the specific information we need. And this is where we start to rely on established patterns. Have a look at this example. We see a classic task topic, a classic macro structure we know. We are guided by the visual cues. Easy, we can just start with a step sequence. Now, imagine having this instead. No visual cues, and even though there's the same macro structure, we can no longer really step into the step sequence. We need to really read it word by word. Let's talk about symbols and icons. An emotional topic. We all love icons. And we engage with visuals in addition to texts. And we can easily decrypt them once we've known the rules, once we've learned the rules, actually. So when it comes to symbols and icons, it becomes a bit tricky when it comes down to the correct universal interpretation. Let's have a look. I guess we all know this icon. And although the floppy disk is quite outdated, we all know it's the save icon. Let's take a more modern approach. Do you know this icon? And do you know this icon? And could it be that both icons actually mean the same? Share. One more example. The exclamation mark. This is easy, it's part of our font, right? And it feels a bit lost, let's change it. So It seems to be more important. It has become bigger. Anyways, there's no context to this exclamation mark, right? But as soon as I put it into context, we can all agree that it's some sort of a safety indication, right? Because it's a standardized display, and we in our community are most likely familiar with those standards. Next topic we want to discuss, emotions. Again, emotional topic. Several aspects triggering our emotions. This can be color, this can be light, this can be pictures, and maybe you even think of your last vacation when you see this picture. But stepping back from this visual approach and really focusing onto texts. Imagine you look up a user guide, and this is the first sentence you read on the page. The user should read the following information carefully. That sounds a bit weird, so let's improve it. Read the following information carefully. Makes it already a bit more personal, but now I wonder, I looked this page up. Why am I instructed to read it carefully, right? Is there any sense to it? So let's improve it again, and maybe we can do a tip. Bookmark this page. We'll get back to that. Now, I can decide whether I want to follow this tip. Now it completely makes sense to me, and it really has become such a conversational style. Now, the tone of voice is a very decisive tool when it comes to emotionally connect to the users or readers. And furthermore, the tone of voice makes it really clear how you respect your users and their personalities. And in some cases, we have such an ingrained tone of voice that we have to become aware of it in order to change and adapt it. This is what is actually happening with inclusive writing, for example. Now, one more example, bringing together all the aspects triggering our emotions. Airbnb is simply suggesting hosting. You can try it, you can leave it be, but Chelsea seems to be quite happy about it. This is a good example of how you can build this emotional connection, and Airbnb offers this certain reliability and trust. Last aspect in this example section, the attention span. And initially, we thought it's a great idea to bring up the attention span, processing time, but quickly we realized we had to differentiate different target groups, different media formats, different information products, different user contexts, and so on. So it was too hard to generalize it. But while deep diving into this topic, I found a tweet that I would like to share with you. Now, people don't have short attention spans. They finish 3-hour podcast episodes. They binge 14-hour shows. They have short consideration spans. They must be hooked quickly. Point, don't fear making great in-depth content, but ensure your first minute is incredible. Now, we do agree. So, in this example section, you have seen how concepts of user psychology can work. But they must be hooked quickly. The only question is, how does it work? So, to become more familiar with habits in the context of how and when we use things, especially when it comes down to how habits can be formed, it makes sense to look into product engineering and habit-related customer engagement. And I'm going to show you 2 models based on a book that I've just recently read, Hooked by Nir Eyal, and it actually deals with habit-forming product design. Easy. But remember, user assistance can be considered a product, or it accompanies products and delivers information products. Now, let's have a look at the habit zone. There are basically 2 main indicators about the habit-forming potential of your specific product. Frequency, how often do you use this product? And the perceived utility. How rewarding is it to use this product? How useless is this product in comparison to others? And in between, there spans the habit zone. And the habit zone is basically the perfect composition of those aspects where you can actually say you can form a habit with this product. Meaning, no matter how often you use a product, if you consider it utterly useless, you most likely won't land in the habit zone. Vice versa, if you have a really, really useful product, but you don't use it frequently, you won't land in the habit zone. Now we know how habits can be developed. So let's have a look at how we can stay engaged. And this brings me to the hook model. How are we hooked? And here we have the base of the hook model and the approach of an infinity sign. And I guess we all want to know the steps towards infinity. It starts with a trigger. Easy. Something makes me want to do another thing. So let's take attending TC World Conference as an example. And I met someone I want to stay in contact with. Easy. Now, this trigger leads me to the action. And in my case of the example, I'm simply logging into social media and search for this person. And then there comes the reward. And in my case, I actually find this person. Yay. But now comes the interesting part. It's followed by an investment. And in general, this means the user puts something into the product, such as time, data, certain efforts. But it's not about the plain investment itself. It's really about re-entering the next hook cycle with improvements. So, in my case, I dedicate my time, I write a message to add this person, but I'm expecting that we will become connected in this social network and that we can benefit from furthermore features. And that is how I got hooked. Now, enough with those theoretic lessons. Let's have a look at some real-life examples. And please welcome my dear co-presenter and friend Anton Bollen, who is now going to show you habit-forming use cases and struggles of his own experience.
Cool. Hey, everybody. It's so good to be back after, 2 or 3 years of stage absence. I'm really glad to be sharing this moment with all of you on the camera, and most importantly, Leonie. Thank you for making it three presentations in a row. They say 3 is a charm, and I couldn't agree more. So as I said, my name is Anton Bollen, and I work as a customer success manager for a company called TechSmith. And what that means is that after our customers buy our software, I work with them to make sure they're happy, they're satisfied, and they're getting a lot of value, and their business goals are being met. And as part of that, I also try to create happy, engaged, and most importantly, active users. Yeah? And you might ask, why? Why are you doing that? You already sold the software. You got their money. Well, the answer is quite simple, because simply selling the software is not enough. If you want to keep and retain their business over multiple years, you need to work with them to make sure the company or the user is getting value out of that software. Yeah? Because essentially, if we take this back to the habit zone that Leonie just explained, we want our users to be somewhere up there, right? We want them to use the product frequently. We want them to get a lot of value out of it, because that is a really great way to ensure that they will continue buying our software, right? And continue being our customers. And I think that is something that many of you can also relate to, right? You want your users to use your product frequently, and you want them to get a lot of value out of it. So this mentality of let's make sure the software is getting used and is actually useful is something that as a customer success manager is always on my mind. It's probably also on your mind as a tech writer or documentarian or whatever your job title might be. And so because it's always on my mind, I always pay attention to other people's products and other experiences and other journeys. And to exemplify a little bit of the habit-forming things that Leonie was talking about, I want to tell you a personal story of mine. My story of Slack, right? So a couple of years ago, about 2 years ago, my company that I work for, we implemented Slack as our internal communication tool. Slack is a little bit like Teams, like Citrix, like many of the other solutions you can use to send messages to each other. And we received some initial onboarding, we got some videos, we got some training, Everything was fine, and people started messaging. We created groups, we created conversations, and everything was going good. Yay, usefulness. But then after a couple of months, I started noticing a lot of problems, at least for me personal as a user. Because at that point, we had created more than 300 different channels. Everything from like official product announcement to cat pictures. And I'm not kidding you. We have a channel dedicated to cat pictures where I can get my cat fix every morning. But all these little channels and conversations also created a lot of updates, a lot of notifications, a lot of noise. And me as a user, I was struggling to keep up with all this information coming in because it wasn't categorized, it wasn't prioritized. And I don't know, I was constantly responding to stuff in Slack, but somehow I kept missing important information and updates and responses all the time. So if we take this back to the habit zone, I would put myself about meh, right there. I was using it semi-frequently, but the usefulness as a business communication tool was simply not there for me. I was not getting the value I was looking for. And that's what you as a company like Slack probably don't want from your users. And if we take this position further to my hook or to the hook model, yeah, I was getting lots of triggers every single day, right? I was getting all these messages. It's part of business. And I was responding to them as best as I could, which is essentially my action. But I already told you that that experience was unorganized and frustrating. So overall, the reward, the usefulness of Slack was not really there. And it was kind of difficult for me to complete the loop and turn Slack into that tool I needed to be. I need to communicate with that thing. I don't have a choice, right? So me as a user, I had to do something to kind of get around and get this thing going. And that is, I had to invest, right? I had to get off my ass and say, hey, Anton, let's fix this. And I did something that many of our users will intuitively do. I went to my search engine and was like, yo, I have too many messages. How do I deal with that? And it turns out, I am not the only person in the world. Gerät wird ausgeschaltet. Technik kannst du unten anmachen. Super. So, der Fernseher sagt, geht gleich aus, der Kleine. Ja, also, I found out that I'm not the only person with that same problem. Other people are being overwhelmed too. Whew, it's not just me. And the articles were kind of funny, like, do I need a channel to discuss soup or cats? But more importantly, through that search, which is something that me and many people intuitively simply do when we face problems in the year 2022, we search for solutions. It also quickly brought me to a potential solution. Apparently, there's a feature in that software that allows me to view all my unread messages in one place in a categorized way. Sounds pretty awesome. So armed with this crucial potential solution, I did what most users intuitively do. I was leaning into a learned behavior. I started another search, and I quickly came to the right user assistance. I came to the Slack help article, and I was quickly impressed. I was like, whoa, this is cool. Because, yeah, it's on a single topic, and it's on the topic that I needed, which helps me as a user process that information that comes to me naturally to look for solutions in a help article. Then also the general navigation, the orientation, and the controls are in the way that we would expect most help articles to look like. And that made it really easy and intuitive for me as a user to get to the help article and just be like, oh, I can find my way around here and I'm not getting tripped up by unconventional design. And that, again, is tying into some of these micro habits that I've just learned as a user. And when we scroll down, it keeps getting better because we can all see that little blue box, which is a visual cue. It draws my focus and my attention. It also has an icon with a magic wand. I love magic, and it just symbolizes to me a little bit like, hey, this might be something magical or something helpful. And sure enough, that little section right there contained most of the information I needed to turn on that hidden feature, which is what I was trying to do. And yep, the next step was easy. I turned it on in the top right corner, klein aber fein, as we would say in Germany. And at that point, I would say, I kind of completed from my kind of crappy stage where I was not very happy, I completed my investment. I put in that extra effort, but I was being guided by the experiences that, or by some of the habits. They helped me because the Slack article was structured in such a way that it was helpful. And yeah, it allowed me to hopefully get there. So the question is, does this actually help me create a loop and start forming habits? And the question is, well, let's find out. So once I enable this unread feature in Slack, this other software tool, right? My conversations are categorized in a much nicer way. I like that instantly. And then I realized, hey, I can read conversations in a categorized way. I can mark them as complete, one section at a time. And I felt more in control. I felt better about it. It felt actually useful. And as I was going through and, checking out my soup recipes and whatever else that's going on, I felt the usefulness of Slack coming back. It's starting to become that tool again that I needed it to be. And when I checked that last message as done, to almost a surprise, this happened. Just a little emoji with some microcopy. But it doesn't seem like much, but you know what? It made me smile. It's emotional. It's something I can connect with to a certain extent. I was like, cool, I'm up to date. And so encouraged by this experience, later on in the day, I checked my messages again. That was pretty quick and efficient now, thanks to the unread option. And boom, I got another emotion, another little emotional aspect. Another one for the tractor, another one. And before I knew it, I was checking Slack every single day or multiple times a day in a very efficient and rewarding way, and I was hooked. I said already, I was checking it. I was marking things off as read. And the whole experience, the usefulness of Slack was starting to become rewarding. It's what I wanted it to do. And it put me to the point where I'm actually happy about using Slack now, to the point that I'm telling all of you that I'm using Slack. And I'm investing more into it. And that really just means I'm learning a little bit more about the tool. I'm trying out new things. I'm sharing my colleagues, or I'm telling my colleagues about the unread feature. And I'm making the overall experience and the tool more useful. So if we go back to the habit zone, I was there before, but I would put myself somewhere over here for now. And that's where we want most of our users to be, right? Let's do one more. And as we do one more, let me have a sip of water. So as you might know, I work for a company called TechSmith. We make a product called Snagit. It's screen recording and screen capture software. And the recorded images and videos can, of course, be saved locally on your hard drive as a file. Whew, nothing crazy here. There is also another functionality built into the software that allows you to take the images and video, upload them to the cloud, and you get a little link, which you can then much easier share in an email or a Slack message or anywhere where file sizes matter a little bit more. And this kind of link sharing technology is something that, especially nowadays, where a lot of people are working remotely or across different time zones, I see a lot of business value in it. The company sees a lot of business value in it. I already told you, it's built into the software, and you might think, well, if it's so useful, all your users are using it, right? Nope. Well, the thing is, it's in there, but in order to get it, you need to not take one click, but rather you need to do 2 clicks and a 3rd click. Here it comes, 3 complicated clicks. Further, the option is hidden in this unorganized drop-down menu, and the button to get a link is called screencast.com. And if you have no idea what screencast.com is, this is not intuitive, this is not discoverable. And I looked this up. Less than 1% of our users had actually ever used that feature. And that is really sad, especially in today's age where we say link sharing is so useful for all these modern asynchronous hybrid workplaces. So we knew we needed to do something to make that feature easier to find, but also allow users to build new habits around using that feature and turn that into a more rewarding Snagit experience. So we did something absolutely massive. We redesigned the button. This is it before, yet another version of share. And this is it now. Hold on, here we go. Yeah. Small update, but impactful. The terminology is now much more clear what this button will do. You can share a link. The icon is also more representative of what it does. It gives you a link to share. And most importantly, the button now actually does what it says it does. You click on it one time, and you get that link I'm talking about. Yeah? One click and kind of done. And these are, well, they're UX changes, right? They're software changes. They're small, but they're impactful. They tie into a lot of the habits that Leonie was talking about. And we, of course, are hoping that this will drive more people into trying the feature, getting value out of it, and then ultimately being more satisfied with it. Our user assistance team, of course, also is doing its fair share of the work in order to guide our users into this new workflow habit possibility. So, of course, we have in-product tooltips like many of you might create for your own software as well. Again, trying to showcase value and perceived utility of this particular feature. And if they need to learn more or want to dive deeper, of course, we have well-organized and categorized help articles. We have tutorials and the stuff you would usually expect from a company like ours to support certain functionality. And, and I also want to draw real quick attention just to top left, share history and preferences button. We also updated those to make them a little bit more complete, and we also categorize some of these outputs. So just a lot of little micro adjustments that we're hoping will ultimately drive more people to start or at least try the share link feature once and have a good experience with it and have it be rewarding. And we want them to then, well, if we look at this, right? We want them to start not just using that feature, but the product more frequently. We want them to see a lot of value in it. And ultimately, we do want them to get hooked, not just on that one feature, which I think is helpful, but on the whole application. And the more rewarding the use of a product is, the more they will do. They will try the software more, they will try new features. And ultimately, for me as a customer success manager, I told you earlier, that's what it's about. I need users who are using it frequently and who are getting a lot of value. And I think that is something that all of you also want your users, for the most part, to do, right? You want them to find stuff useful, and you want them to use it frequently. And so maybe the question that remains is, and I think Leonie can help us answer that, how do we get there? What can we as technicians, technical writers do to apply some of these micro habits into our own content to make our own user assistants more intuitive and easier to use? So Leonie, what you got for us?
Well, it seems like we can have a look at best practices, Anton. So before we deep dive into the best practices, let me assure you, we are really back to basics here. And I'm pretty convinced you all are already creating or using intuitive concepts in your user assistants. But let's have a look. In general, we can state, know and respect your target group. Benefit from established patterns, keep it simple, and we all know it, consistency is key. Now, pretty general, right? One more time, let's look into the details. It means offer a clear navigation and orientation. Rely on topic-based writing. You remember the macro structures we are familiar with to scan our information. Use concise categories or metadata as a rock-solid base for the display of your information, the search for your information, and even filtering this information. And we get to the last point, the tone of voice, very interesting. So keep it friendly, but distinct and reliable for information products such as user guides, plain instruction, very objective. Keep it encouraging and forgiving for complex tutorials or extensive end-to-end scenarios. Encourage your users to get them hooked and forgive them. They don't have to know everything by step one. And when it comes to UX copy, adapt the tone of voice to an even more conversational style. But when doing that, keep in mind the inclusive writing. And with all this being said, this was just the tip of the iceberg. So if you are interested in intuitive user assistance, get familiar with topics from user psychology and combine it with the topics from user assistance in general. So thank you for attending this session. Please feel free to feedback, and we're open for questions now, I guess.
Yeah, Leo and Anton, thanks a lot for sharing your knowledge and showing us all these great examples and putting them into context. Let me just say one thing before we start with the Q&A session. From now on, you also can give feedback to this talk. And just scan in this QR code, please, and then you can give feedback to our speakers. And please do it, as we want to improve and we really need your feedback. Yeah, great. So let's start with the Q&A session. Are there any questions?
Hello, thanks for your presentation. There were really useful things there. And my question is, when you're talking about language in UX copy, I found it a little bit difficult to be more, how to say, conversational when it comes to error messages. Also, when the product is really corporate, like conversational style, I sometimes wonder if it's useful or if it's appropriate. So my question is, how do you apply conversational style to like error messages and warning messages and corporate standards and enter big enterprise products.
That's actually a good point. So even in a UX microcopy, you have to distinguish different target groups, of course. So maybe you're just using a product and you receive an error message. It could be you have to offer a more reliable tone of voice because it's about the plain information about your error. Maybe it's also a bit more forgiving style. It depends. Know and respect your target group. Like differentiate those different UX copies. Also could be for wizards. This is more like maybe you're being helped as a user through a process. This could become a bit more conversational because it implies having several steps and you really, kind of look to guide the user through it. And I guess it is possible to apply it a bit more conversational.
I would maybe add to that, right? Target groups are important. Some things are just dry and corporate and boring, and there's no way around it. I mean, the technical communicators, we're not marketing wizards. But maybe let's take the error message, right? Error messages, we all have seen them, and it's like, okay, error code 72B, what do I do now? And maybe that's actually where a hybrid can come into play, where, yeah, sure, we still need to be dry and corporate when we say, hey, an error has occurred, 72B. But for a user, it actually would be quite helpful to then be given some solution or guidance on where to go next. And maybe that's where the second line of your help message or in your button or maybe the content that comes after that, you can apply that bit more conversational style. Like, okay, error occurred. These click here to find some help articles that will probably help you solve your problem, right? Where you then try to maybe separate what is the fact about the software, and then how are you continuing the conversation to the user in order to help them? And maybe there are some elements there where you can bring in a little bit of the conversational style, where it's not just read the support for my help, but try to be a bit more, because at the end of the day, at least that's the way I often see it, the users of your product, and I don't know what you do, but they're still humans. They still like to laugh. They still like to be talk to other human beings, right? And we as humans tend to receive conversational messages more than just dry, because at some point when it says, please read this instruction carefully, we start skipping that stuff and we don't even pay attention. Error messages, right? How many of us click away error message without reading it all the time, right? Error message, gone, and I was like, oh crap, what did it say? So maybe there's something to be said about redesigning error message to be a little bit more appealing to the audiences. But yeah, target groups can't be perfect everything. Yeah?
There's actually a question from our online audience.
Super.
Janina Meyer is asking, how do you collect feedback on your users' needs and behavior? Do you simply call them? Do you have a periodical questionnaire?
So I can talk about how we survey our users. We do a couple things. We have some anonymous tracking in the software that can be turned on and off by the users. So we get some data. So that's how I know that only 1% of our users ever use that share link feature. Yeah, so at least those that were kind enough to share their data with us. Beyond that, we do have a lot of surveys. We run surveys all the time with our users, in particular those that are no longer customers. We have a trial for the product, and if you finish the trial and you don't buy from us, we will try to find out why. And so we will try to approach them with surveys. Why did you purchase or why did you not purchase? And we're trying to learn from that, right? Was the product not useful? So yeah, we do, I would say, we try to do a bit automatically with data tracking where applicable and allowed, but the real stuff usually comes out of the exit interviews, out of the post-purchase or post-trial surveys. And then, yeah, also periodically we try to check in with users, but it can be really hard to find the data and get those responses.
Yeah, great, thanks.
Hast du noch was dazu zu fügen?
I could add, so most of the leads are really product related. But for example, when you look up online help, so you can of course run analytics and see how much time users really rely on your online help. And observe this data and do certain improvements in case it seems like no one really wants to read your online help. So classic analytics, I'd say.
Yeah. On the flip side, I love looking at help centers and trying to figure out what is the most commonly viewed article, because that's usually your biggest problem. right? And so it doesn't really tell you the details of who's using it or who's using it not. But if a help article just bubbles to the top is getting way more requests than anything else, then it's probably a sign that the users are not able to use that particular feature very successfully, right? If they keep having to look things up. But there's a lot of demand for it. So maybe it's less analytical at that point, but it gives you some guidance points to look into further.
Cool. Yeah, thanks. Are there some more questions from you, from your side? No, okay, then.
Doch.
Ah.
To my links? Well, we just start. That's a wonderful question. Thank you, you're asking that. So we just changed that button on October 23rd or 24th. So we only changed it like 2 weeks ago. I don't have real data yet. The first stuff I was looking at is that of the initial people who are starting the product new for the first time, they're already 4 times more likely to use it than before. There's a bit of an asterisk because maybe the people who upgrade to the new version are also the ones who are already power users and way more dedicated. We'll have to see over time where that really works out. And I hope that is maybe something I can actually reflect on at the Frühjahrestagung or in a year on a blog article where we can really see what impact did that have, because I'm sure it's not perfect. I'm sure we'll learn some shortcomings and we'll have to tweak it a little bit further. But this initial, as I was saying, right, they were 4 times as likely, and I think especially like enterprises and corporate users, where it's more of a business communication aspect, we're seeing an increase as well. But nothing with hard numbers yet that I would love to share, because I don't want to like say 700% and then it ends up being 300% once the power users are out or something, yeah? But the first signs are promising, and I hope I can keep you all updated on that.
Yeah, thanks.
Good question.
There are some more questions from our online audience. Frank Roche is asking, what approach is appropriate if a text form or language style is chosen that appeals more strongly to one user group, but irritates or annoys another user group? And then here's a suggestion to make. In that case, should we use the type that benefits the majority of users instead of focusing on small subgroups?
That's
So
a
actually, it's
complicated
2
Yeah.
questions. in
Yeah,
one.
I mean,
So-
I haven't.
So
well,
what
I
to
have thoughts
do?
on it. Do you have?
What to do if
Pretty
you've got
complex.
conflicting?
Yeah.
Of course,
target
this is
groups?
conflicting. In the end, you have to find the perfect compromise for all users, I guess, in my opinion. And then it depends. Maybe why are there certain subgroups? I mean, does this mean we have to improve on inclusive writing and such, and we have it on the political agenda of the company, for example, could be a case? Then it's really, I guess, a company decision which way to go.
I would add to that, right? We work for business. In a happy, perfect world, I would love to make unique content for all my users and keep them all super happy and really talk to them in their language and in their jokes and humor. At the end of the day, I still need to get my documentation and my videos done by like Tuesday afternoon. And I can't reinvent the wheel for all of them. So it comes down to what you said. It's a little bit of finding that compromise. Usually it turns out, let's do what works universally for all. The content is maybe not quite as awesome and appropriate for let's say the Dutch people, but it's good for everybody else. That's maybe some of these compromises. I can tell you from my side, we do a lot of English content, which we just call global English. We just hope it works universally for most. But for some key markets, for the UK and for the North America, we do create some unique content pieces, more on the marketing side, but also a little bit on the tutorial side and webinar side, user assistance side, where we sometimes do take a step back and say, hey, this market or this audience is particularly important, or this is the launch of a new product in the UK or something like that, where we do take that extra step and say, hey, let's re-record it with a British speaker, so the tone, literally the tone, sounds more familiar and comfortable to them and things like that. But I would say, at least in the position I'm in my software company, that's the exception to the rule. The rule is, let's try to find the thing that caters to most, because we don't have the resources and the time and the manpower and woman power to do it so many times. And I feel that's probably accurate for most of us here, but... Maybe you can all prove me wrong.
I guess in addition to a general tone of voice, I mean, you have the opportunity, especially in user assistance, to offer different information products for different target groups. So maybe you can find a workaround to adapt the tone of voice in those information products and certainly still comply with the general tone of voice of your company.
But
Last thing I thought about.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Some more questions from your side? Okay, so last question from our online audience. Could you recommend any literature on the topic of intuitive UA?
yeah,
Intuitive use, yeah. I
Man.
mean,
Was this
oh, das geht alles viel zu lang.
well,
was this
I know what you're looking for. I mean, it's a great book, but it's not the only book out there. And I guess you really have to combine this passion for user assistance with this passion for user experience and user psychology. So it depends. Certain aspects are really relying on design questions. Others are on information processing questions. So it's so much, really take your time, look around. There are a lot of great books into the directions of UX, into the directions of user assistance, but also into the directions of product design. So it really depends on what main topic you're into and just go for it.
Just go for it.
Huh?
Yeah, just go for it.
Just go for it.
I'm sorry, I have to cut it here.
Yeah.
So thanks a lot to you all for your participation.
Thank
Thanks for joining.
Yeah, and I wish you a great 3 days of this World Conference this year.